um, say picture how the data warehouse system ideally works. So on the very left side, you'll see that there are data sources. So data sources could be anything, any database, any file system, anything, because any system can store data on any system. It's up to them. So some might use Oracle, some might use the file system, some might use the SAP, some might use Informatica. So we have several kind of data sources. The best thing about the Informatica that it supports almost all of the data sources which are not supported in other ETL tools, and that's the reason almost 90% of the data warehousing projects are using Informatica as their ETL tool. So we read from the data source systems. Those are called the transactional data, which is storing the day-to-day transactional activities of the organizations. Those are being extracted through ETL tools in the staging area. So what we generally do in the ETL process, we extract the data, we read the data from the source system and dump it as is into the staging area. Staging area is nothing but a separate area, or you can see the database dedicated for the ETL process. So once we dump it, once the data is into the staging area, then we again read it through ETL tool and do all the data manipulations. So again, we do some cleansing, we do some validations here. Validations are based on the requirement, what kind of validations are required. So if we are reading from the bank files, then the validations could be that they want to check whether the files which is coming, which is containing the transactional entries of a particular customer, so does it match with the actual entries or not. Or generally header trailer contains the process dates into their files. So we want to validate whether the file is containing whether the process date is today's date or not. So these are the very small validations. There could be the bigger validations also, but yes, we perform all sort of validations before loading into the data warehouse. So once we are done with all the validations, we move the data into the data warehouse, and that is again through Informatica. So again, the data warehouse, there could be multiple options we have, like we have Oracle. Data warehouse is nothing but a big database, you can say, where the way of storing is a bit different, so that the reporting could be made easier. So if you see here, we are directly loading into the data warehouse, and then from data warehouse they are creating the different data marts, say finance data mart, marketing data mart, and the sales data mart. There could be many others like this. So that's how the data marts and data warehouses are created. Post that, once the data marts are created, now it's time to utilize the information that we have stored in the data marts. So if you see at the right, there are 4 systems created. Those are actually representing the different kind of users, like analysts, the managers, the executives, operational personnel, or the customers. So they use different reporting tools. Say they can simply use the SQL. There is a Cognos, there is MicroStrategy, business objects. So these are the reporting tools which we use to create the reports out of data warehouse. But if you see the scope of ETL, the Informatica tool, that is covered in first 3 layers: the data sources, ETL software, and data stores. So once the data is stored in the data warehouse, ETL ends there. ETL role ends there. So, any questions around data warehousing concepts or the topics that we covered so far. You can just simply write it down and I will take this up. I'll take up your queries at the end of the session as well. So, no, at least let's move forward. Okay. Now the basic questions. I covered the some part of it, but again we will go through it. The need for ETL tool. So we'll go point by point. It says often performed by the COBOL routines. So COBOL is nothing but the mainframes files. So all the old system or the big systems are still being maintained on the mainframe system. Be it the hotel management systems, there are very big hotel chains available which are maintaining the data in the mainframes. There are banking systems which are maintaining their transactional data in the mainframes. So when we are going to read the data from the mainframes, this is actually the COBOL routines. So Informatica provides the facility through which we can easily read from the COBOL routines, COBOL files. Okay. Sometimes source data is copied to the target database using the replication capabilities of standard RDBMS. Okay. So we can read from the different kind of databases. So it could be Oracle, it could be DB2, it could be SQL Server. So Informatica supports all of them. So we can read from XLS file as well, and we can read from a simple flat file also. Okay, so ETL software is basically enhancing the process of extraction. I mean, if you are good at Oracle or the SQL queries, still you can extract the information from the different databases, but you cannot extract it from the COBOL files. You cannot extract it from the flat files, and even again, if you are using the databases also, it makes it very complex. ETL tool is making the extraction process easier, and I would say it enhances the performance as well. So there are several ETL tools available on the market. So few are listed here. So there is the data stage, which is now under IBM. There is the SAS system. Informatica is anywhere there. Informatica is from the Informatica Corporation. That has become so big that it would not be acquired by any other companies. So there is BO also, business objects, Hummingbird, and there are other few which are providing their ETL tools. But the most successful ones are the Informatica, and others which are being used are the data stage and the ab initio. Yep. All right. So the components of Informatica. So if we talk about the Informatica software, so there are basically the 4 components. I'll take you through this components also on the screen if you have some time today. Otherwise, on the later classes, we'll be working on these components only. So I'll brief you what these components are about. So the first is the repository manager. So repository is nothing but a database. Repository is nothing but a database where all the metadata of the Informatica is stored. So if we talk about the metadata, metadata is nothing but a data about data in a very simple terms. So data about data as in whatever coding that we are doing, whatever functions are there, all the backend data of that coding is stored in form of database. So that is being stored in the repository of the Informatica. Again, that is a metadata that we generally don't access, but yes, ETL tool has to store that information in the repository so that other information, basic information, logs could be provided easily. So repository manager is more of an admin tool where we are creating the repository, we are adding the different kind of folders, creating different users, providing different kind of access. So repository manager, along with its web console, that is called admin console, becomes the admin part of the Informatica. Then comes the designer, workflow manager, and workflow monitor. So as a developer, we use these three tools. The designer is more like where you create your code, where you decide your flow, that how the data would be read, what all transformations, what all validations, what all cleansing thing you are going to perform on your source data. So that's that all you do in the designer, and which target you would be using. So what would be the definition of the target, what would be the definition of source, definition as in what would be the columns, what would be the primary keys, foreign keys of those columns, and the same way for the target also we can define the primary keys and the other key attributes of the target. So that all we do in the designer. Here we are provided with the different kind of transformations which we use for filtering, for routing the data. If you want to look up on the data, so that all is done in the designer itself. Okay. So once our basic flow is designed, we need to create the basic connections, and we have to run that code. Like in a simple C code, we create the program and then we create the executables. So workflow managers are more like executables, but here you define it is important because if you are using the database connections, then you provide that connection information. If you are using the files, then you give the path and the server of the files, that where it is, where the source file are and where the target files would be. You provide the lookup files, where are you looking up onto, and then yeah, so these kind of details are provided in the workflow manager. And once you start the workflows, the flow of your code, so here we can start, you can run our code in the workflow manager. So that can be monitored in the workflow monitor. Here you can easily see the logs, what is the runtime, the performance statistics, what is the throughput, which node is being used, which process ID is being used, how many rows you read from the source, how many it got loaded, how many got rejected. So that all information is present in the workflow monitor. So let me show you how the designer looks. So as we said, we have a designer. So that's our designer page. This is the repository window where you see that there is one repository already created. Once you double click on it, or you right click on it and connect, it prompts for the password. Provide the password and it connects to you. So if you see on your screen, there are 4 icons showing up. So these are the 4 icons for the 4 components of Informatica. Presently we are on this green icon, which is representing D, that is for the designer. On the left, it's a repository manager. If you go to the right, it's a workflow manager, and then there's a workflow monitor. So you can go access these components from here itself. So there is a we are seeing that this is an Informatica repository, info repo, where all the codes are stored. If you see, there are different kind of folders created. So those are the subcategories. We can create the folders generally the subject area wise. As I said, we have we could have the different subject areas or different categories where we want to categorize our codes. So we can create different folders here. So these folders are created through repository manager, as it's a part of admin, Informatica admin. And if you go further into the folders, you see there are the source folders, there are target folders. Mapping is our code. So you can see there are mappings as well. So this is all we are going to use while we start working on the Informatica. So we will be covering different we'll be covering the in the different classes we'll be covering the different transformations. So we'll be doing some exercises as well. So if you see, I opened one of the mappings, which is a very simple mapping. These two are your source systems. This is our expression, which is one of the transformations where you can perform some operations, and then it loading into the target. So that's how our Informatica mapping looks. That's a very simplest example of a mapping. So like expression, we have a different kind of transformations which we can use. So we'll cover almost all of them, at least all the basic ones, and we'll be doing the exercises and the case studies on them as well. All right. So that was our Informatica process. So let's move on to the theory part again. Let's finish this up. So Informatica, we went through the components. Now the Informatica provides the different components. So there are different components in the Informatica architecture. As I said, there is a repository we talked about. So Informatica repository is at the center of the Informatica suite. You create a set of metadata tables within a repository database that the Informatica application and tool access. So these repository databases are not created by us while we are installing it. Those get created, and the information gets stored as you create your codes and all. So it automatically stores the metadata. You don't have to do anything as such, but that metadata can be stored while retrieving the statistics. As I said, we can see the performance data as well. You can see how many rows we are reading from the source, how many is getting loaded. So that all information is stored in the metadata tables. Okay. Then there is an Informatica client. So Informatica client is generally stored on your individual machines. So we generally keep server at one place, which is very powerful, and then you can have n number of client machines, which are your local machines. That there is a possibility that you keep the server at the Unix box, and your clients are on the Windows box, where you can easily access through the GUI and do your coding. So if you go by the definition, use the Informatica client to manage users. As I said, we were accessing the screen that I shown you before for the Informatica designer. That was the client itself. So use the Informatica client to manage users, define sources and targets, build mappings, maplets with the transformation logic, and create sessions. Of course, that will do in the workflow manager. The Informatica client has 3 client applications. So repository manager, designer, and workflow manager. So there is a 4th one, which is for workflow monitor. Since we are not actually developing anything there, that is being used for monitoring purposes and gathering the performance stats. That is not mentioned here. So these are the four client application we are using. and besides that there is an Informatica server. So Informatica server accepts the source data, performs the data transformation, loads the transformed data into the target. So Informatica server, actually everything whatever we are doing at the client machine, whatever we will be doing here, the actual processing is being done at the corresponding server, Informatica server, where we have kept the server. So all processing, every processing is at the server level. That's why the servers are kept so powerful. So yep, that's how the Informatica architecture is. And just a pictorial view. You have the sources, then you have a server in between, which is directly connected with the repository, the metadata, and it is reading from your mappings, whatever flow you have created. It is trying to run that, trying to connect the data, trying to flow the data from one system to another system. In between it is also transforming the data based on our design in the mapping, which we have created in the designer. So that is the very simple pictorial view of the architecture, how the Informatica works. Okay, so I think so Informatica server, that's a process flow. I think we have already discussed it. Informatica server moves the data from the source to target based on the workflow and metadata stored in the repository. As I said, it is moving from source to target using the repository information and its own capabilities. So there is a integration service which is actually running the flow. So that is a part of the server again. A workflow is a set of instructions how and when to run the task related to ETL. As I said, it is more of a executable for your code. So where we can run it, we can schedule it. Informatica has its own scheduler as well. Informatica server runs workflow according to the conditional links. So I mean, that is more into the details. So when we create the workflow, there are the separate entities, we call it as session, which is connecting to your mappings. So say if you want to execute the multiple mapping code, so you have to create the multiple session and you can run it in one workflow in a sequence or in parallel. So we'll get to know more about it once we get into the tool. So session is type of a workflow task which describes how to move the data between source and target. So session is the key entity which is actually running the mapping flow. And mapping is a set of source target definition, defines the rule for data transformations. So yeah, as I said, here you can define your flow, you can define where the data can be read, what all validations you can perform. So that's all about today's session. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer those.